Have you ever found yourself confused when one scholar says something is halal while another says it's haram? You scroll online searching for clarity, but instead of answers, you find more confusion. You begin to wonder, how can both be right? How can Islam, a religion of truth and unity, have such differing opinions? My dear brothers and sisters, this question is not new. It has existed since the earliest generations of scholars. But understanding why these differences happen can not only clear your confusion, it can deepen your faith, expand your wisdom, and strengthen your connection with Allah. In our search for truth, we often stumble upon questions that shake our certainty. One of the most common struggles Muslims face today is understanding why scholars, all claiming to follow the Quran and Sunnah, sometimes disagree on what's halal and what's haram. For many, this becomes a test of faith. They begin to doubt the consistency of Islam or feel frustrated, wondering if religion has become too complicated to follow. But the truth is far more beautiful and profound. The differences you see are not signs of confusion. They are reflections of the depth and richness of our faith. Allah, in His divine wisdom, revealed a religion that transcends cultures, times, and circumstances. The Quran is one, the Sunnah is one, and the principles of Islam are unchanging. Yet, Allah also allowed room for interpretation, understanding, and scholarly reasoning. This is not chaos, it is divine design. It is what allows Islam to remain alive, adaptable, and relevant across centuries and continents. When scholars interpret differently, they are not creating division, they are applying their understanding of Allah's words within the framework of truth. Each opinion is rooted in love for Allah and dedication to His law. Even if the conclusions vary, what matters most is not which opinion is easier or stricter, but which is more sincere and grounded in knowledge. The early generations of scholars understood this reality deeply. They debated passionately but respected profoundly. When one scholar disagreed with another, it was not seen as competition, it was seen as collaboration in seeking truth. Imam Shafi once said, "My opinion is correct, but could be wrong. And the opinion of others is wrong, but could be correct." That is the humility of a heart illuminated by knowledge. In our time, however, many have lost that humility. We mistake difference for division and opinion for opposition. We forget that no scholar holds the keys to absolute truth. Only Allah does. Scholars are servants of knowledge, not owners of it. Their disagreements stem from the limitations of human understanding, differences in linguistic interpretation, varying authenticity of hadith, or distinct social contexts. For instance, ruling that applies to a desert tribe centuries ago might look different when applied to an urban society today, but the essence remains. Both are rooted in the same divine sources. This is why Allah praises those who seek knowledge and warns against arrogance, because arrogance blinds the heart to wisdom, while humility opens it to truth. When we learn to view scholarly disagreement with respect, we begin to see the mercy in it. Allah could have made every matter black and white, but He didn't. He allowed flexibility in areas where rigidity could harm the believer. This flexibility is not a loophole, it's a blessing. It allows Islam to fit the realities of human life without ever compromising its divine boundaries. For example, differences in prayer methods or fiqh rulings are not contradictions, they are reflections of the Prophet's diverse teachings that accommodate different situations. When one scholar emphasizes one narration and another emphasizes another, they are both drawing from authentic sources. So instead of letting differences confuse us, we should let them strengthen our trust in the vastness of Allah's wisdom. When you see variation, remind yourself this is how Islam breathes across time and place. The goal is not to debate endlessly, but to follow what brings you closer to Allah with sincerity. Sadly, social media has made it easy for people to weaponize these differences. Many Muslims fall into the trap of labeling others as wrong, misguided, or even deviant simply because they follow a different opinion. But that was never the way of the righteous scholars. They disagreed, but they never disrespected. They debated, but they never divided. They sought truth, not victory. When we lose this spirit, we lose the essence of what it means to seek knowledge. Our focus should never be on winning arguments, but on purifying intentions. Because in the end, Allah will not ask you which scholar you followed. He will ask whether you followed the truth with sincerity. Every opinion you choose to follow should be done with respect, humility, and a heart anchored in the remembrance of Allah. True understanding begins when you stop searching for the easiest opinion and start searching for the most truthful one. So, when you feel lost between differing rulings, Take a deep breath and remind yourself that Islam is not fragmented. It is perfectly whole. Scholars are human, they can err, but the Quran and Sunnah never do. Seek knowledge with patience, not haste. Ask Allah for guidance before you ask people for opinions. And most importantly, avoid turning your religion into debate material. The purpose of knowledge is not to prove you are right, but to help you live rightly. Every ruling, every fatwa, every scholarly view ultimately leads back to one purpose: to help your soul draw nearer to Allah. The more you focus on that purpose, the more peace you will find amidst differences. Because Islam was never meant to divide hearts, it was meant to unite them in their pursuit of divine truth. And when you approach that pursuit with sincerity and humility, even the most confusing differences become opportunities to strengthen your faith, deepen your understanding, and fall more in love with the perfection of Allah's wisdom. There comes a time in every believer's life when confusion fills the heart, when questions about religion begin to rise like waves in a storm. And among them, one question stands out. Why do some scholars disagree on what's halal and what's haram? This question may seem simple, yet it carries the weight of centuries of human understanding, reflection, and devotion. Many people, when they see differences of opinion, begin to think that perhaps there is inconsistency in the faith, or that Islam is too difficult to follow. But the truth is far deeper and far more beautiful. The disagreements of scholars are not cracks in the foundation of Islam. They are reflections of the depth and mercy of Allah's divine wisdom. The Quran and Sunnah are perfect, unchanging sources of truth. What varies is human interpretation, because humans are limited in understanding. Allah created diversity not only in our faces, languages, and lands, but also in our levels of understanding. No two scholars think in exactly the same way, and no two hearts perceive truth through the same experiences. This diversity, when rooted in sincerity and knowledge, becomes a mercy for the Ummah. It allows Islam to be flexible enough to guide people across different times, cultures, and circumstances while keeping the core message intact. When a scholar gives a ruling, he does so after deep study, linguistic analysis, understanding of context, and awareness of the purpose behind each law. Another scholar may look at the same evidence and reach a different conclusion because his environment, reasoning, or understanding of a hadith may differ. Both are sincere. Both are striving, and both can be rewarded even if their conclusions vary. The Prophet A said that when a scholar strives to make a correct judgment and he is right, he gets 2 rewards, and if he is wrong, he still gets 1. This shows us that disagreement among the learned is not a failure. It is part of the divine plan that encourages reflection, humility, and patience. Yet, in our modern age, we often see these differences used as weapons to divide. Instead of learning from each other, people argue, mock, and label others as misguided simply because they follow another opinion. This behavior stems from arrogance, not from love of truth. True knowledge humbles the heart. It does not inflate the ego. The great scholars of the past disagreed, yet they never allowed their differences to destroy unity. Imam Abu Hanifa, Imam Malik, Imam Shafi'i, and Imam Ahmad all differed in certain rulings, yet each of them deeply respected the others. They understood that the goal of knowledge was not to win debates, but to bring people closer to Allah. Today, when we scroll through social media, we see endless arguments about halal and haram as if the religion has become a battlefield of opinions. Islam was never meant to be practiced through online debates or emotional reactions. It is a religion of understanding, balance, and submission. The believer must approach these differences with a heart that seeks guidance, not dominance. When you encounter 2 differing opinions, do not rush to pick the one that suits your desires. Instead, turn to Allah and ask for clarity. Consult qualified scholars who embody both knowledge and character. Remember that the scholars are not competitors. They are servants of knowledge, each contributing to the preservation of this deen. When you understand that their disagreements arise from sincerity and not rebellion, your heart begins to see beauty in diversity. The differences among scholars show us that Islam is alive, dynamic, and adaptable. It breathes into every era with relevance because Allah made it so. And yet, no matter how many opinions exist, the truth of Islam never changes. Only the paths to understanding it do. So when confusion comes, let humility be your response. Do not let differing views distance you from faith. Instead, let them remind you of the greatness of Allah, who created minds capable of thought and hearts capable of love. Let them teach you that truth is not always found in rigid uniformity, but in sincere submission to the one who knows all. For the real test is not whether you can argue your view, it is whether you can hold your opinion with humility and respect for others. When you approach Islam this way, differences no longer divide you, they deepen your appreciation of Allah's wisdom. You begin to realize that these variations are not barriers to faith. They are doors to reflection, empathy, and a higher understanding of what it means to be a Muslim. When we reflect upon why some scholars disagree on what is halal and haram, we must first understand that Islam is a religion built upon divine revelation, not human emotion. The Quran and Sunnah are the two ultimate sources of guidance, and they are perfect in every sense. However, when human beings engage in the process of interpretation, understanding divine words through human minds, differences naturally emerge. This is not because Islam is unclear, but because the human experience is vast, varied, and shaped by countless factors such as language, context, and time. The Arabic language itself is deep and multi-layered, where a single word can carry several shades of meaning, and this can lead sincere scholars to different conclusions while studying the same verse or hadith. Some scholars may interpret a text literally, while others look into its broader purpose, or maqasid, the underlying wisdom that the law intends to achieve. Both methods have their place in Islamic jurisprudence. One might focus on preserving the letter of the law, while the other emphasizes the spirit of the law, but both ultimately aim to uphold what Allah intended. This diversity of thought among scholars is what has allowed Islam to thrive across centuries and civilizations. From the deserts of Arabia to the cities of Africa, Asia, and Europe, Muslims have lived under different circumstances, faced unique challenges, and still found Islam to be practical and relevant because of this diversity in scholarly thought. These differences are not a weakness, they are a mercy. Allah could have made all scholars agree, but then the flexibility and depth of this faith would have been lost. When one opinion fits a particular culture, situation, or time, another might suit a different one. This adaptability is what has preserved Islam as a living, breathing faith that guides every generation with wisdom and balance. Yet today, when people see scholars disagree, they often become confused or even disillusioned. They ask, if Islam is the truth, why can't the scholars agree? But that question stems from misunderstanding the nature of knowledge itself. Scholars do not disagree because they reject the truth. They disagree because they are seeking it. And each scholar approaches the Quran and Sunnah through deep study, sincerity, and fear of Allah. When they differ, it is not a reflection of contradiction, but of intellectual richness. Just as two doctors might diagnose a patient differently based on their understanding of symptoms, two scholars may differ based on their understanding of evidence, yet both are working toward healing just as scholars work toward spiritual and legal clarity. Their goal is not self-promotion or division, but to guide believers closer to Allah's pleasure. However, in the modern age of social media, this beautiful diversity has been turned into a source of conflict. People who have not studied a single book of fiqh or hadith feel entitled to pass judgments on scholars who have dedicated decades of their lives to learning. It has become common to see individuals mocking scholars or declaring one group deviant because they follow a different opinion. This behavior reflects not strength, ignorance. True knowledge does not make a person arrogant, it humbles them. The scholars of the past, those who established the great schools of thought, disagreed with one another, but their disagreements were rooted in mutual respect. Imam Malik once said, "Every scholar's opinion can be accepted or rejected except the one in this grave." And he pointed to the grave of the Prophet. This statement shows the humility and clarity of those who understood that all human interpretation is fallible. Their hearts were not attached to being right, but to being sincere. When a believer sees differing opinions, they should not feel lost. They should feel grateful that Islam allows depth. The variety of rulings gives people room to practice their faith according to their circumstances, while still remaining within the framework of the Quran and Sunnah. This is why scholars are described as the inheritors of the prophets. They carry the responsibility of guiding people with wisdom, not rigidity. Instead of questioning why scholars differ, we should ask how we can use their differences to deepen our own connection to Allah. Sometimes differences push us to think, to reflect, and to study more deeply. They remind us that Islam is not about blindly following others, but about seeking understanding with sincerity. When we learn to approach these disagreements with humility, we realize that Islam is not a religion of confusion. It is a religion of balance, mercy, and depth. The disagreement of scholars does not divide the ummah unless arrogance enters the heart of the followers. As long as we keep our intentions pure and our hearts soft, these differences will strengthen us rather than break us. They will teach us patience, respect, and the beauty of unity within diversity. Because at the end of every scholarly difference, the goal remains the same: to please Allah, to uphold justice, and to live in harmony with the divine guidance that He sent for all of humanity. When we talk about the disagreements among scholars regarding what is halal and what is haram, we must first acknowledge that Islam itself is flawless. Our human understanding of it is limited. The Quran and Sunnah are the perfect sources of divine guidance. The process of interpreting them is a human endeavor, one that naturally involves depth, context, and sometimes variation. The Arabic language in which the Quran was revealed is incredibly rich. A single word can hold several meanings, each with unique implications for rulings. Scholars, with their different methodologies, linguistic insights, and historical contexts, often arrive at distinct conclusions while studying the same texts. For instance, one scholar might interpret a verse literally, focusing on its exact wording, while another considers the broader wisdom and objectives behind it. Neither is wrong, for both aim to fulfill the ultimate purpose of divine law to bring justice, mercy, and guidance to humanity. This diversity of thought has existed since the earliest generations of Islam and has been a source of strength, not division. It is through this plurality that Islam has adapted to countless cultures and circumstances while maintaining its core principles. The flexibility in scholarly interpretation allows the religion to remain timeless and universal, equally applicable to a Bedouin in the desert, a merchant in Istanbul, or a student in modern America. It is not a sign of inconsistency, but a reflection of how deeply Islam respects intellect and reflection. However, in our time, this diversity is often misunderstood. Many Muslims, especially those exposed to the fast-paced, opinion-driven world of social media, become confused when they see scholars holding different opinions. They might ask, Islam is one. Why can't the scholars agree? But this question reveals a lack of understanding about how Islamic knowledge works. The scholars' disagreements are not rooted in personal desire or competition. They stem from their sincere efforts to seek the truth based on evidence. Each scholar approaches the sources with humility and fear of Allah, knowing that even a small misstep in interpretation can have great consequences. Their dedication is an act of worship. And yet we live in a time where people who have never studied Arabic jurisprudence or had to feel entitled to publicly criticize lifelong scholars. Some go so far as to label one scholar too strict and another too lenient, creating unnecessary conflict and disunity. But the great scholars of the past, Imam Abu Hanifa, Imam Malik, Imam Shafi'i, and Imam Ahmed disagreed with one another too, and still maintained immense respect and love. They never turned their intellectual differences into personal rivalries. Imam Shafi once said, "I believe my opinion is correct with the possibility of being wrong, and I believe my opponent's opinion is wrong with the possibility of being correct." This humility is what preserved unity in the early generations. The problem today is not disagreement itself, it is the arrogance with which people handle disagreement. When pride replaces humility, what was once a mercy becomes a weapon. We forget that Allah Himself allowed room for diversity in interpretation to make our religion practical and compassionate. The differences among scholars reflect the beauty of Islam's adaptability, not its weakness. To truly benefit from this diversity, we must change our mindset. Instead of seeking black and white answers for everything, we should strive to understand the reasoning and wisdom behind different scholarly views. Knowledge in Islam is not meant to create division, but to lead the heart closer to Allah. When scholars differ, it gives believers the opportunity to see the depth of divine wisdom and the vastness of Allah's mercy. A person living in one part of the world might follow an opinion that suits their culture or situation, while another follows a different one, both within the boundaries of Islam. This is not hypocrisy, it is flexibility. What truly matters is sincerity. When a Muslim seeks to please Allah and follows a scholarly opinion based on evidence and trust in learned individuals, Allah will reward their intention. The Prophet I said, when a judge strives to make a decision and is correct, he has 2 rewards, and when he strives and errs, he has 1 reward. This hadith shows the compassion of Allah for human effort and the sacredness of sincere scholarship. Therefore, when we witness scholars disagree, we should not feel shaken in our faith. Instead, we should feel awe at how Allah made His religion vast enough to embrace human diversity without losing its essence. The disagreements among scholars are not barriers. They are bridges that connect the timeless principles of Islam to the ever-changing realities of human life. The key is humility, to respect the scholars, to seek knowledge before judgment, and to remember that the goal of all interpretation is not to win debates, but to please Allah. If we approach these differences with sincerity, patience, and respect, we will find that they do not divide us. They deepen our understanding, strengthen our unity, and remind us of the profound wisdom behind Allah's perfect guidance. Many Muslims today find themselves puzzled when they see scholars disagree on what is halal and haram. They begin to wonder if Islam is divided or if its teachings are uncertain. What they often forget is that these differences are not flaws in the religion. They are signs of its intellectual depth and divine mercy. Islam was revealed as a universal message meant for every culture, every age, and every type of society. It addresses not only the spiritual aspects of life, but also the social, economic, and moral dimensions of human existence. Because of this vast scope, interpretation was necessary. The Quran is a divine book full of wisdom, context, and layers of meaning. The scholars, who are the inheritors of the prophets, devote their lives to understanding these meanings. They study Arabic linguistics, jurisprudence, hadith sciences, and the historical context behind each revelation. But since each scholar approaches the text with different levels of knowledge, methodology, and experience, it is natural that some conclusions differ. For example, one scholar might interpret a hadith as general, while another views it as specific to a situation. Another might emphasize the spirit of the law over its literal wording, while someone else might prioritize precision over interpretation. These are not contradictions, they are reflections of how deeply Islam allows the intellect to operate within divine boundaries. Through these differences, Allah allows the religion to stay flexible and adaptable to different times and places without compromising its essence. The problem arises when people, without knowledge, view these differences as conflicts or inconsistencies. Many Muslims today have grown up in an environment where instant answers are expected, where every question must have a simple yes or no. But Islamic law does not always work that way. It requires depth, reflection, and understanding of context. When a scholar declares something halal or haram, it is not based on emotion or personal preference. It is rooted in evidence, reasoning, and fear of Allah. The Prophet Muhammad himself encouraged ijtihad, independent reasoning, when qualified scholars deal with new issues. He said that if a judge strives to reach the correct verdict and succeeds, he receives 2 rewards, and if he strives but errs, he still receives 1 reward. This shows that Allah values the sincerity of the effort, not just the outcome. It reminds us that disagreement among scholars is a mercy, not a curse. In the early centuries of Islam, when great imams like Abu Hanifa, Malik, Shafi'i, and Ahmad lived, they held differing opinions but still respected one another immensely. They understood that their goal was not to prove who was right but to serve the truth. Imam Malik once said, "Every scholar's opinion can be accepted or rejected except the one in the grave," referring to the Prophet. This humility preserved unity among Muslims even when differences existed. Unfortunately, today many people have lost this adab, the etiquette of disagreement. Social media has turned complex scholarly discussions into debates and arguments, where people without any Islamic training feel confident in labeling one opinion wrong and another right. This arrogance causes division and weakens our spiritual connection to the scholars of the past. When we observe these differences with wisdom and humility, we begin to see the beauty of Allah's design in allowing diversity. The scholars' disagreements are not just about rulings, they reflect how the same divine message can address a world of changing realities. For example, Islam spread from Arabia to Africa, Asia, Europe, and beyond. Each region brought its own customs, languages, and social structures. Yet Islam remained relevant because scholars were able to interpret the law in ways that suited the needs of their people while staying true to the Quran and Sunnah. This adaptability is one of Islam's greatest strengths. It ensures that the religion does not become rigid or disconnected from real life. The variety in scholarly interpretation allows believers to find ease within the boundaries of faith. When faced with 2 valid opinions, Muslims can choose the one that best suits their circumstances without guilt, as long as both are grounded in authentic knowledge. This flexibility prevents hardship and promotes balance. It reminds us that Allah's mercy outweighs his punishment, and that the purpose of Islamic law is to guide, not to burden. Therefore, instead of seeing scholarly disagreement as confusion, we should see it as an opportunity to appreciate the vastness of divine wisdom. Every differing opinion is a door to understanding how Allah's guidance fits perfectly into every human experience. At the heart of it all lies sincerity. What matters most is not which scholar's opinion one follows, but whether the heart seeks Allah's pleasure. When a believer chooses a path sincerely, based on trust in knowledgeable scholars and genuine intention to follow the truth, Allah rewards that effort. The goal of seeking knowledge is not to find loopholes or superiority, but to strengthen one's relationship with the Creator. True scholarship comes with humility, acknowledging that only Allah knows the ultimate truth and that all human understanding is limited. We must learn to approach these matters with the same humility the early scholars had. Instead of arguing, we should learn. Instead of judging, we should understand. Instead of division, we should build respect. Disagreement in Islam does not mean disunity. It is a sign that our faith is alive, engaging, and capable of guiding all generations. When Muslims learn to see differing opinions through the lens of mercy, not ego, they will rediscover the beauty of Islam's intellectual and spiritual heritage. Every disagreement among scholars, when viewed correctly, becomes a lesson in patience, a call to knowledge, and a reminder that Allah's guidance is infinite. The diversity of scholarly thought is not meant to confuse us, but to strengthen our faith, showing us that no matter how deep we go into understanding this religion, the ocean of divine wisdom never ends.